So for me, that means talking to people. That means having friends that I can turn to when I'm having bad days, recognizing that it has been 10 years and life has gotten a little bit easier, but I still have really bad days. And there's still times that I miss my brother to death. And that's okay. And I still find myself crying for hours at a time, and that's okay. Because I know I need to do that in order to be the strong advocate in the next hour that I need to be. The other thing that I've learned, so I worked really hard in college to get a lot of good grades and put a lot of stuff on my transcript and resume. Not a soul has looked at my transcript or my resume since I left college. Not a soul. Every so often I open it up on my computer just to make sure it's still there so that I could look at it at least. Nobody. So if I were to tell you that you really have no idea what's going to happen after school, you really have no idea what direction your life is going to take, so enjoy this. I wish I had heard that lesson. I wish I had internalized that lesson when I was in school. Even to the day I graduated, I didn't know what I was going to be doing with my life. It wasn't until after I graduated that this whole nonprofit thing came about and this has all been successful. So I'm still really working hard on that resume. Take some time for yourself. Know that what stands out on a resume and stands out on a transcript much more is passion. It's creativity. It's doing something different. When I'm hiring individuals now to work at Active Minds, I don't care what their GPA is. I don't really care where they went to school. What I care about is the little bullets that come underneath those things of this is what I learned here, or this is what I really became really interested in, and so I devoted 4 years of my life to it, or I just learned about it my senior year and it just became my world. That's what I look for. That's what a lot of employers look for. The other thing I do things that are totally unrelated to mental health. I close my computer on the weekends and I spend time with my friends and family. I have sports hobbies. I'm only going to be a good mental health advocate if I do things that have absolutely nothing to do with it. So if you're a soccer player, if you're a knitter, if you love TV, don't give it up. Don't let anything else overrule and overrun your interests. And it's easy to do that in school. It's easy to stop sleeping and stop doing the things that you once loved in high school. You need that balance. So if you've lost it, I encourage you to bring it back again. So this mental health thing. I find myself in a situation where we still don't talk about mental health. Through Active Minds and through our 250 plus chapters, we are changing the conversation and we are creating spaces for students to tell their stories. But we're not quite where we need to be. My grandmother always told me that cancer was the C word in the 1980s. She said that nobody ever really spoke the word. If somebody was diagnosed with cancer, somebody had cancer, it was just, oh, that person has that. That person has that C thing. Imagine that now. Look at all the TV commercials, all the billboards, all that we talk about boasting cancer survivors and how amazing it is. And for those people who have survived their own cancer, how proud we are. For those people who have lost loved ones to cancer, how much we cajole them. That was just 20, 30 years ago. We need to aspire to make that mental health of 20 or 30 years from now, and I would say even before that, 5 or 10 years from now. We need to get there. The slogan of Active Minds is changing the conversation about mental health. How do we get there? The first thing that we need to do is open a dialogue. We use this word stigma around mental health a lot. A lot of people don't know what the word means. To me, the word stigma means silence. There is a stigma around mental health and mental illness because there is a silence around it. Because we don't talk about it, because we don't know other people are dealing with it, because we think we're the only ones, it's scary. We need to open a dialogue and we need to use our voices. The next thing that we need to do is to look at the language that we use around mental health. Did my brother Brian commit suicide? Technically, yes. But he didn't commit burglary or perjury or some other crime. For some reason in suicide, we have this word that marginalizes that kind of death as opposed to any other death. My brother Brian died by suicide the same way my grandmother died of cancer. Was Brian mentally ill? Sure. But it's not as though he was mentally ill and I'm mentally not ill. What does that mean? We don't all have a mental illness, but we all have mental health, and it all exists on a spectrum. Some of us have more serious mental health issues, like Brian, that we may need more comprehensive support for, like therapy or medications. But others of us get really stressed out, or we journal. We may run. We may scream into a pillow, do other things to take care of our mental health. We're not all that different. And know that the person who sits next to you at your Tuesday 10:30 class may have a mental health disorder, and that's okay. Was Brian schizophrenic? Was he depressed? Technically, sure. But he was actually a brother, a son, a friend who had schizoaffective disorder. We need to stop identifying ourselves by our diagnoses and our disorders. My best friend is not anorexic. She's somebody who's dealing with anorexia. My step-nephew is not autistic. He's somebody with autism. We are people first, no matter what our experiences, no matter what our diagnoses, no matter what our disorders, and we need to honor and respect who we are before we label ourselves or label people around us. Was Brian crazy? Was he nuts? Was he wacko? Was he loony? This could go on and on. I'm not going to answer that. But my hope is the next time you hear those words or you use those words that you think of Brian. He looked kind of like me, a little bit taller, skinny guy. I want you to think of him. And I want you to stop using those words to realize that it could have been somebody like Brian labeled as such. And if it's not Brian, I want you to think of the people that you know in your life who could be labeled that way. We've grown up in a society that embraces issues of physical health. I'm not afraid to tell you my father has cancer. I'm not ashamed to tell you that I broke my feet when I was a kid. But for some reason, we are ashamed of mental health. We've grown up in a society with a lot of stigma and with a lot of silence. But I've also seen so much hope in our generation to break that stigma. If we're going to do anything about it, it needs to be us. We need to start talking. We need to start bringing this information back to our families, our friends, and our communities and say, hey, I may have grown up with this, but I don't need to live with this forever. I need to understand more about depression. I need to understand more about bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, whatever it may be. I want to understand more. I want to understand what it's like to live with this, and I want to be able to support the people around me, the people I love who deal with this on a daily basis. Dr. Bernie Ahrens, who is a former senior science advisor to the director of the National Institutes of Mental Health, a mouthful, a big guy, head honcho in the government, once came to an Active Minds conference and said that we're like the individuals in the 1960s in the Civil Rights Movement. He said it all started with a group of college students fed up with discrimination and with the energy to fight it. If we're going to fight the discrimination, the stereotypes, and the stigma around mental health, it's going to come from us. Beyond these walls tonight, I urge you to go and talk. Go home, talk with your roommate about what it's like to live with bipolar disorder, or what it was like to have a mother with depression, or the pressures that you put on yourself to be thin, to be the best, whatever that may be. I want you to go home and talk and share your story and expect that that person you share it with have one too. Or if you're worried about somebody in your life, a friend, a family member, maybe somebody like Brian who just doesn't seem like he's acting like himself, go up to him and say, hey, I'm worried about you. Is something going on? Do you want to talk about it? It's not your job or your responsibility to make him feel better. But what you can do is take his hand and walk him over to the counseling center. Or call the counseling center up and say, hey, I have this friend here with me who I'm concerned about, and he wants to make an appointment. We all have roles as friends that supersede any role that anybody else here on campus has. 67% of students who feel suicidal tell a friend before they tell anybody else.